Hi, I'm Tim Sommer. This is Musicview on WNYU, and I'm here with Jean-Jacques Burnell. And they've just put out an album. It's called The Men in Black. It's their last release. It's their fifth studio album. You also have one live album. How did the concept of The Men in Black evolve? Because it's cropped up on earlier recordings, and now it's into a full-blown concept for this LP.
Yeah. Well, ever since our first long-playing LP, first long-playing record, we were interested in the fact that certain people believed that they had a monopoly on the truth. For instance, religions always tend to believe they have a monopoly on the truth, and also have a monopoly on God's right ear and that. And on the first LP, we started finding out about things like that, and we just put a man in black in one of the pictures on the sleeve. In fact, if you look at the back of the inside sleeve, there is a mib.
That's Radus norvegicus?
Radus norvegicus, yeah. And since then we've been pursuing those investigations, and it just kind of erupted all over. With there seemed to be loads of ideas for that. The Men in Black idea is one that's been around for about 25 years now. It's a phenomenon which hasn't been totally explained. Various people have been subjected to Men in Black meetings, and these guys apparently go around visiting anyone who has had any interest in UFOs, or who considers that they have a bit more than the average person's knowledge on UFOs, or has seen things which are very interesting. They visited these people and tried dissuading them from divulging any more information.
Right.
So they're a bit of an enigma, because
that must be what Two Sunspots is about.
Well, the whole album's about some aspect of that.
Right.
There is an American called Albert Bender, the late Albert Bender, because he had written quite a lot on UFOs and their connection with just about everything that we accept as established, tenets of our society, the Christian tenets and everything. And he was visited by these Men in Black, and he died fairly shortly after one of these visits. And the only common denominator with them, apart from the fact they visit only people who have been involved with ufology, is that they tend to be quite tall, over 6 foot tall, tend to be totally free from hair, and have slightly oriental features, and they talk in monotones, if they talk at all, because a lot of the contactees don't remember having been talked to as such, but have been communicated to. So they're definitely an enigma, because no one's very sure if they are humanoids or humans working for government agencies.
So there's some definite factual base behind the Men in Black. It's just not a myth created by the Stranglers or someone that the Stranglers have been influenced by.
Yeah, and it's an attempt, not altogether successful attempt, to demystify a lot. And you can't do that in an LP, but demystify a lot of the ideas behind the Bible, because the Bible, in view of our modern technological knowledge, tends to be gradually demystified. It's not so wonderful now to think of Immaculate Conception, because Immaculate Conception it could be artificial insemination, and there are loads of phenomena which we in the past gave godly type meaning to, and mystical meaning to,
and now seem totally everyday, or if not everyday, no longer the miracle they once were.
Definitely. So and bearing in mind that I don't think anyone in their right mind would accept that we were the only form of life on the planet, because it's mathematically impossible for us to be the only form of life in the galaxy, rather, because if you just know your basic mathematical probability theories, then you realise that even if there are say n million numbers of other solar systems, which we accept that there are, then there must be, and if this planet is the only one in this solar system which has life, then at least you've got an average of 1 over n, in every solar system. So at least must be at least one planet like this in every solar system, since we know there are millions of them, and since we have to accept that this solar system is one of the younger solar systems. then it gets.
It's just not a mathematical probability that we could be the only ones here.
In this solar system, impossible. It's mathematically impossible that we are the only things. So obviously, bearing that in mind, then going back to all the information that we have, for instance, that we've garnered from ancient mythology and from biblical references and other religious tomes, there always seems to be quite a few common denominators. For instance, the Greek gods were very human. Very human in their habits, in their social habits. I mean, if you think about the Minotaurs, the Centaurs, the Satyrs...
They had their ills and they had their assets, but they were basically very human creatures.
Like the God of the Old Testament as well. He was like nothing like the God of the New Testament. He was a really a spiteful, vengeful God. And so these, if you go back to these Greek gods, they mated a lot with the local population, you know, and like you talk in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it talks about God made man in His own image, right? And if you think about the Greek gods and all these freaks that they created, they could just as well be genetic, unfortunate genetic experiments,
right,
until they found the right crop. And also they talk about woman came from a perfectly decent rib, right? Well, if woman came from a decent rib, that's only a description of modern day bone marrow exercises and
that could be reproduced. That is totally possible. It could be reproduced today. It's not such a miracle.
Right. So the fact that it is possible today, and the fact that things like Jericho, right, was destroyed by sound. Well, we now know, and some musician friends of mine also have experimented with inducing sickness and vomiting and nausea through subsonic sounds. You can destroy. I mean, government agencies. I read a few years ago that the Pentagon had been experimenting with sound to destroy, just like subsonic sounds, and things like
sound as a weapon.
And things like beams of light destroying cities. Well, we're using beams of light now to play our records and things like that.
So, was it a group decision on the part of the Stranglers to do an entire LP based on that, or was it one or two of you?
It was a group thing. Yeah, everything we do is cooperative.
Yeah. Now, the Men in Black concept as such, that directly first surfaced on a track on the Raven LP called The Men in Black, right?
Yeah.
I noticed that the new LP seems to be a lot more lush, a lot more full than the former LPs. Your bass, the sort of grotesque throbbing sounds of your bass have been toned down a bit, and Hugh seems to have gotten a lot more melodic. This isn't really a conscious effort to become more lush, less abrasive, is it? Or
no, we're obviously becoming more bourgeois.
Is that it?
We on hearing some of our older stuff, we didn't like exactly the sound we'd done, and in the past we hadn't produced ourselves, and we're producing ourselves now, and we're also becoming more fluent with the tools that are around us, the studio tools, and also our instruments. So it's just more control of what we're on about.
Was there a certain time in the Stranglers' career where they made the decision that the first 3 LPs as a block were not the sort of direction you wanted to go in? Because there was a long break between Black and White and Raven, which was the next studio LP after it, that there was a live break in between it. What sort of changes did you go through between that? Because you really maybe only play like 2 or 3 songs from your first 3 LPs live, all the rest being Raven and Men in Black material.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when you write a song, and it might mean something to you. Hopefully, it means a lot to you when you write it. But every moment away from that moment, the initial moment of creation, it lessens the feeling that you have for it. And imagine playing the same thing hundreds and hundreds of times again. It becomes mechanical, and you totally forget what you're on about. It's just like in organised religion, they have all these ceremonies and rituals, and they don't know what the fuck they mean anymore. They've totally been lost in the mists of time. So the same, I think, with any musical.
Right.
That there's no point singing something just for the sake of it, and we still get people asking us for some of what were in Europe fairly successful singles, which really just not into really.
Yeah. I think it might be difficult for a lot of the Americans to realize just quite how big the Stranglers are in Britain or in Europe. Because you probably are still one of the biggest bands in Britain right now, even if the press wouldn't think so, but in terms of sales and in terms of an audience support.
Well, fortunately, the press has never thought much of us, which is great, which means that we have never been anyone's blue-eyed boys at any one moment, and that we have been able to survive separate from any media support, which isn't too good, because I mean, imagine the whole basis for any situation relies on someone else's support. Imagine, I know, El Salvador or something, you know, or any of these countries which requires someone else's support to perpetuate themselves. It's not the healthiest of situations, you know.
Yeah. Has doing the Raven and doing Men in Black change your ideas about how to transfer a more complex concept onto vinyl, other than just the 3-minute song, about how the people out in the audience are receiving it, and has it changed your ideas about that?
Well, it hasn't changed our attitude towards how people receive stuff, because from the early days we've had hundreds of people walk out on us, and I'm totally into maintaining that kind of black and white attitude, but certainly people's attitudes do change, because sometimes they catch up with ideas that you may have been perpetuating for a while, and other times they just move on.
Yeah.
So,
you released your first records a long time ago, I guess. I guess you've been releasing, the Stranglers have been releasing records since December 1976 about. So
no,
that's...
the first corporate emission was 77.
It sounds like something dirty, a corporate emission.
Well, good.
You know, so
there's a lot of dirt involved in it. Definitely.
How do you see the changes in the Stranglers in those 4 or 5 years, as opposed to the changes that have gone on in the other bands that maybe you broke out with in 1976, like the Clash or the Jam or the Damned or anyone else like that?
Well, can't be really too general about that, because all those bands were made up of highly volatile elements, and it was a fairly volatile situation in Europe at the time. It's even more so now, but doesn't have such a generic kind of identity
today, or
at the moment. I mean, you've got to realise, for instance, that when certain bands do gigs in Europe, it's much more of an excuse for political confrontation between various groups of people, rather than as you say here, a kick-ass rock and roll,
or if not as much a political confrontation as a fashion confrontation, or an ideological confrontation.
Yeah, ideological is probably the best word, because I mean, you have a lot of political fashions and just normal clothes fashions, things confronting each other. But it does remind one a bit of Ishwood's Berlin. It has that kind of that kind of
sort of decadence within a sort of very hopeless environment.
It's hopeless until a few people offer some hope, which various political groups are, and so you can either accept those hope ideas of hope, or reject them. And of course, in Britain at the moment, and in France and Germany, in fact, you have a lot of groups groups of people using rock and roll or rock events, or whatever you want to call it, contemporary music events, to air their exercise their muscles, flex their muscles, and see how strong they are. In fact, like you have a lot of skinheads from the British movement, or the National Front, or the League of St George, or the Movement 88, smashing gigs up.
Right. Okay, so this is the Stranglers from the Men in Black LP with 2 Sunspots. That was the Stranglers with Sunspots, 2 Sunspots. Now, JJ, you released a solo LP about 2 years ago, right?
Yeah. Called
Euroman Cometh?
Jawohl.
Yeah. Would you like to say anything about that? I thought when you listen to it today, it holds up surprisingly well. I like it a lot more now than I ever did before, and I'm surprised a lot more people didn't catch on to it.
Well, it was released about 6 months before electronic music and syncopated music and using machines was
in vogue.
Yeah, in vogue, and fairly much more socially acceptable to the ear. So there was that thing about it. And also now in Britain, a lot of the groups are tending towards much more greater acceptance of the European notion, because at the moment
the European notion of politics or music, or
well, you can't separate the two in Europe. the fact that eventually we're moving towards the United States of Europe.
And that was sort of the concept behind Your Man Cometh, wasn't it?
It was the motivation behind it, yeah. You see, since the war, there's been a definite trend towards unification of Europe, whether a lot of jingoistic people in every country, even in France, don't dig that notion, because they think it'll... so people on the left think it's a right-wing conspiracy, and people on the right think it could be a much easier way for socialism to become predominant in Europe. And they don't realise that those notions of left and right in Europe are totally redundant. They might still mean something here, but they are redundant in the historical scheme of things. Europe is going to be united whether you like it or not. And I mean, already the EEC, the common market, although it has a lot of teething problems because it's like a real bureaucratic mess, you know, but it is already the most powerful economic union in the world. So world beware when Europe is also politically together and militarily together, because then maybe we won't have to be a sandwich anymore between the two great powers, because at the moment there's like this big game between the Soviet Union and the States, and we're right in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Because the largest concentration of troops, nevertheless, is in Western Europe.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of a piss off, you know. Must be a bit of a mystery for a lot of kids, certainly in Germany.
Why there are all these American troops running around?
They see all these foreign
when they're
troops
not at
around.
war with anyone.
Yeah, they see they've grown up with tanks all over the place.
Yeah.
And they're not Germans, you know. They must freak them out.
You worked with on that LP. You worked with Brian James is on that, and
Brian James did one song on that.
And you worked with John Ellis of the Vibrators too, right?
Live, yeah.
Yeah.
And he's now been playing with Peter Gabriel for the last couple of years.
Oh, I hadn't known that.
And who else? There was Lou Lewis, who's a great London
bluesman, and
harp player.
Who's played on one of your singles, right?
Yeah. There was also Pete Howells, who was a drummer from a Manchester group called The Drones, and Penny Tobin, who played with the Slits.
Right.
Was live.
What was your particular inspiration to go out on your own?
Test it, you know. See what would happen.
Do you think Hugh had basically the same sort of thing in mind when he cut his solo LP about a year ago?
No, he wasn't as stupid as me, as dumb as me, to go out on the road with a totally different thing to what he was known for.
Does it? Oh, okay. I think before I ask the next question, I think we're going to go to a second song from the Men in Black LP. This is "Hallow to Our Men." Anything particularly about that, other than it's sort of a prayer, isn't it?
It's a rewriting of the Lord's Prayer, with which no doubt we've all been brainwashed and are familiar with, and it's just a rewriting in view of our scientific knowledge.
All right then, so this is the Stranglers with "Hallow to Our Men." That was "Hallow to Our Men" from the Stranglers. This has been Musicview. I've been here with J.J. Burnell of the Stranglers. Right, J.J.?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, I'm Tim Sommer. Good night.
Bye-bye, Timmy.